There's no two ways about it. Your mental health is critical for your success at Cal. I'm Rodolfo Mendoza Denton, a psychology professor at Cal, and your co-host, along with Dri Kavusi, fourth-year undergraduate student and ASUC Senator. I'm joined today to talk about the topic of mental health by three distinguished guests. First, Madison Gordon, ASUC Senator. Second, Aaron Cohen, Senior Staff Psychologist in the Counseling and Psychological Services Unit in the University of California, Berkeley. And Stephen Hinshaw, a professor in the Department of Psychology and Vice Chair of Psychology in the Department of Psychiatry in the University of California, San Francisco. To each of you, thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. Let's get started.
So right off the bat, how did y'all get interested in mental health? Steve, do you want to lead us in?
I got interested in mental health. It's a very long story, but the short version is, as a kid growing up in the Midwest, my dad would disappear from time to time. And what I didn't know then is the family was under doctor's orders to say nothing about it. I didn't know that he was disappearing into mental hospitals. Mm-hmm. When he finally came out of the closet with this when I was 17 and had gone off to college, I realized that my life's calling was to work on mental health and work with children and try to solve some of these problems from a research and a clinical perspective. So I was hooked ever since.
And Steve, I happen to know that you've written a book about this, if not several.
Yes, I've tried to blend my scientific interest in children's mental health and family mental health with narrative and disclosure. I wrote a book a dozen years ago called The Years of Silence Are Past, dealing with the silence of my family growing up, and other books about narrative, mental health, as well as the science.
We'll get into those. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Madison, what about you?
Yeah, very similarly, stems from personal and family history. I suffered with my own mental health for as long as I can remember. And it wasn't until I graduated from high school, took some time off, and then started college that I was able to really reflect on where I was, went to see a counselor, and realized that I had been suffering from clinical depression and anxiety for many years in my life. And since have gone through like a really great journey, visiting therapists and psychiatrists and realizing that I'm not the only one here at Berkeley, I'm not the only student going through it. And yeah, that's where I got started.
Thank you. And Aaron?
Well, it's amazing how the family and the personal, I think many mental health providers have been touched, and had some personal experience, and that was how it was for me. I struggled as a youngster, and really looked up to the psychologists that I saw and the school counselors that I saw, and at that point wanted to become a school counselor, didn't really know what that meant, and could never have imagined, working at UC Berkeley in the counseling center.
So why is it called mental health? Sometimes incoming students think of being sick or ill, have these physical symptoms, but a lot of mental health, you can't see it. So could you elaborate on some of these hidden disabilities or different abilitied students on our campus?
I don't think that mental health is the term that we may use in the future. It's emotional well-being. It's how you feel about yourself. We don't really think twice about getting our cars a well car checkup. We don't think twice about going to our doctor for a physical checkup. But if it's mental health, it's something wrong with your mind, and you must be crazy, and you see a head shrinker, and all of a sudden the stigmatizing language comes to the fore. We've got to be fine-tuned in college mentally and emotionally. I think we have to take the charge out of the sort of electric charge almost of, there's something wrong with you if you talk to someone about it. It's a sign of strength. It's a sign of resilience that you would take as much concern for your mental emotional well-being as you might for your physical well-being.
And you mentioned stigma, and I know I actually took your psychopathology class. It's awesome, and you discussed stigma a lot. And what does that mean? Why do you think that the idea of mental health is stigmatized?
Well, this is a very long story. One of my other books is called The Mark of Shame, about the stigma of mental illness that's gone on since we've really been a species. And throughout history, if people are suffering mentally and don't seem as though they're as capable as other people, or maybe behave in unpredictable and even violent ways, that's very threatening to a lot of observers. and we stigmatize with the language we use, crazy, psycho, mentally undeveloped. You can think of all of these terms, and we would really like to, again, put this on a level playing field with your physical well-being, your emotional well-being. We all need checkups. We all need to deal with this much more than thinking you're crazy if you have these issues.
Thank you. And I'll add on that I think what's funny is a lot of people say, you know, mental health is something we don't think about because you can't see it. And I always found that statement to be very funny because you can have a sprained ankle and I don't see what's going on in your ankle, right? But there are outward symptoms of both physical and mental health. And I see them on a similar playing field. And it's, again, just like you said, something that everybody should get checked up on, that no one should feel like they're different for having to check in on their mental health.
I think the thing that I see a lot from students is this idea that, oh, I should just be able to get over it on my own. And again, we're kind of using that idea of the physical, that you know, if you have a sore throat, you just don't go, oh, I'll just get over it. Mm-hmm. You know, you use the services and the supports available on campus. Even if you're struggling academically, you know, sometimes you can study harder, you know, you'd be more efficient, but you also have access to GSIs and professors and drop-in hours, and you use those services. You don't just kind of go, oh, I'll get through this, you know, and so. What's
the line between, you know, I haven't slept in a few days, I'm just tired and cranky, to, you know, full-blown symptoms of poor mental health? You know, how does a student know?
It's the same issue as blood pressure. Mm-hmm. What's the point of your systolic and diastolic blood pressure, which is a little bit high or it's in the pathological range? The same is true for behavioral and emotional symptoms. There's an arbitrary cutoff. But when you're impaired and you're suffering and your performance isn't what it should be, that's when it's time to get a checkup.
So, Madison, you bravely mentioned that you worked out your own mental health. How, you as a student leader, do you ever feel stigmatized? And what's your advice for students that might be scared to seek help?
Well, I'll say it took a lot of support from my friends, from my partner at the time, to really go out and seek services. So it's not just about, what I would encourage students is, even if you feel like you're in a kind of cruising path for your mental health, look out for your friends, look out for your partners. Because it was their support that got me to go seek services in the first place.
Can I ask you to clarify, what do you mean cruising along the path of mental health?
Well, you know, we have bumps in the road with our mental health every so often. Maybe you have a test coming up and you're a little nervous for it. But in general, not every day waking up and having just an overwhelming feeling of sadness, not waking up and not being able to control your thoughts and body because of what's going through your mind. Mm-hmm. I would say that's at a point, and that's at a point where I was, you know, crying every night, where I was having to take breaks to sit in the bathroom, to be alone. And I know I'm not the only student that's going through it.
Well, no, this is a great way to kind of, there's such a continuum. Mm-hmm. And I think we, you know, that I can almost guarantee that all of us sitting here at some point have felt sad mm-hmm. or nervous about, you know, a test or a lecture or something. I would probably think that many of us would have at some point thought, oh wow, did someone just say my name when no one was there? Mm-hmm. You know, you leave the house and you think, oh, did I lock the door? And so you go back. That doesn't necessarily mean you have depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder. But there's a continuum. I think that as you have more symptoms, as you have more impact on your life, and when it starts to get in the way of your, for students, it's going to oftentimes be academics, but it can also be personal life, relationships, your dating life, your family life. When the symptoms start to kind of get kind of impact that, that's when something might be going on, and it would be worthy of an assessment.
We used to think that you had a mental health condition or you didn't. Even in the DSM, mm-hmm. you've got a disorder or you don't. The science now shows us everybody's on a spectrum. All these symptoms are on a spectrum, and where the cutoff is really depends on the suffering involved as much as the symptoms.
And what are the most common symptoms, or what are the most common ailments plaguing, if you will, college students? What do you usually see? Well,
when we look at the top 3 reasons why students come to the counseling center, and this is actually nationwide, it used to be depression, then anxiety,
and then academics. And now it's actually anxiety, depression, and academics and relationships are kind of on the even keel in the
And I would think
third place.
attention problems are high up there too.
Absolutely. And attention problems kind of span.
Yep.
You know, if you're having some, and when I say anxiety and depression, I distinguish between the adjective anxiety and depression and the clinical disorder. Mm-hmm. You know, you're having some symptoms, but concentration can be a problem with, you know, sadness or depression, nervousness or anxiety. Absolutely.
Aaron, can I ask, when you say the academics and relationships, what does that look like for the average student?
I think oftentimes it's breakups in terms of relationships. That will get someone will feel really overwhelmed with maybe chronic issues that created a breakup, and so that might be one piece of it. In terms of academics, it oftentimes is concentration. You know, students are saying, I'm having trouble focusing, I'm having trouble staying connected. I used to be able to read a page, and now I read the page and it goes from one ear, you know, it goes out of my head. I'm going to my lectures, but all of a sudden 45 minutes is over and it's like I wasn't there.
It's a lot of self-talk too, is what I've learned from my experience. Is I can kind of tell where I'm at with my mental health based on how I talk to myself in my head. So if I'm working on something really hard and I say, oh wow, you're so dumb, why didn't you get this? I know maybe I'm not in the best place and I should be seeking those supports. Whereas for me, when I said, you know what, this is hard, you'll get back to it, we'll work it out, you'll get a friend, we'll get through it, then I know I'm in a better place with my mental health. It's a lot of how I talk to myself.
Steve, you made specifically the point about attentional problems, and Aaron made the helpful point that it spans across the different issues we're talking about today. What does attentional problems refer to?
This is like a symptom in medicine. I might have a fever and there's 100 causes of that fever. I could be having poor concentration and lack of focus because of depression, because of anxiety, because of something called ADHD, where this is a more primary issue, because of earlier trauma I've experienced, just because of the stress of being a student, because of relationship problems. It's really nonspecific, but it is a very pertinent symptom because this is what college is all about, organizing and executive functions and paying attention and getting it together, and whatever the specific cause, attention problems can really get in the way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in that same vein, when you start to feel these symptoms, if you can recognize them, or your friend says to you, hey, you're not acting the same, what's up? And you do decide to seek counseling, where do you go first? What first?
I should probably handle that one. You know, I think there are a number of ways to get connected. Counseling and Psychological Services is one of the main counseling services in the Tang Center, and you know, the easiest way to get connected would either be to walk into the counseling and psych services office, or call us. And at that point, you know, often you will be asked, is this an urgent issue? If it's an urgent issue, we want you to come in as soon as possible, and we have walk-in hours. If it's not urgent, we generally will set a student up with either an in-person or a phone, what we call a triage assessment, which is just a short way to kind of find out what a student is wanting, with the goal of, in a collaborative way, working with the student to figure out what would be the best option for them. So really on this campus, Counseling and Psychological Services is the main option, but doesn't have to be the only option. There are many students who utilize services outside of the university with their insurance. I will often encourage students to seek out other supports, whether it be their friends, the student groups they're involved in, religious organizations.
One quick point of clarification for our viewers who are new to the university. Where is the service located?
The Tang Center is at 2222 Bancroft, and it's the main university health service, and Counseling and Psychological Services is up on the 3rd floor. You get off the elevators and go all the way to the left.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but is there a website or a specific term to type into a search engine?
You know, if you just say UC Berkeley Counseling and Psychological Services, that will get them there. Absolutely.
Could I cut in with just a point related to all this? Why would the college years be such a time for these psychological, mental health, emotional concerns? For many students, first, this is the time that you're away from home for the first significant amount of time. Second, the stress level's never been higher. And third, around the world, whether you're in college or not, the teen and early adult years are the time that evolution has created of onset for significant concerns with depression, anxiety, intensification of attention problems, etc. So it would be no surprise that this is a difficult adjustment for many people, but putting on the sort of bravado of, I'm above it, I don't need to talk about it, is the wrong attitude.
Or I'm my own person, I'm independent now,
right.
and I'm out to prove something.
Right.
It's also important to point out and recognize that the first two stressors that you talked about, mainly the big stressor of being at Cal, can be overwhelming, even for older students,
Absolutely.
even for student parents
Absolutely.
who might not fit into these adolescent categories.
Right.
Well, and I would encourage students to really see us, sometimes that word it fits into the stigma, counseling and psychological services. I would really encourage students to see us as a support service. We have a significant amount of students coming in each year for career counseling, help trying to understand, what kind of major they want to choose, what kind of career path they want to choose, adjustment to college. We see a lot of first-year students who are, the word is homesick. It's a big transition, and so you don't have to come to the counseling and psychological services. You don't have to wait until you're depressed. I often say that stress leads to sadness and nervousness, which leads to depression and anxiety. Let's have you come in and utilize the support services when you're feeling stressed.
Aaron, you made a great point about for example, a relationship breakup. And that just reminded me of your earlier point about the perception that the cause is out there and I should deal with it on my own, and I should get over it, it will pass. Whereas I think the message that we're hearing is that the services that are offered are there precisely for those moments when you are feeling down, when you are feeling incredibly anxious.
Absolutely, and what I would do is I would have, again, I think the idea is that everybody's an individual, and so what I would do is have students kind of think through, are there normal support services? Are there normal coping mechanisms working? And so if there's a breakup or you have your first negative experience with a grade at UC Berkeley and you get sad, that's normal. You get nervous, that's normal. But all of a sudden, if 3 days later you haven't come out of your room, you're not eating really well, your friends are starting to say, hey, what's going on? We're worried about you. That's when, we may be a really good option to come in, be assessed, kind of think collaboratively about what might be helpful for you.
I'm going to push the metaphor again.
Please.
Don't wait for your car to have the transmission fall out in the exhaust pipe, dragging the ground. At the first sign, this is when social support, and it could be peer-to-peer, it could be groups like Active Minds on campus or Let's Erase the Stigma groups, starting up in high schools in the Bay Area. We're going to try to spread to college campuses too, where it's support around mental health and stigma that may not be one-on-one therapy or counseling per se.
Steve, you said something earlier that I really identified with. A lot of students on this campus, don't necessarily recognize they have this I'm above needing counseling. And what I've noticed is that manifests itself often in self-medication, alcohol use, other issues. A lot of students these days are abusing study drugs just to do well in class. What do you all have to say about that? What are your thoughts on this self-medication culture we have?
Yeah, well, I think it's a product of the environment of Berkeley. I think that Berkeley is at times an unreasonably demanding environment. But of course, what I would say is that I would really not encourage self-medicating because it often ends up putting you in a worse place than you started out in. And that's totally not the point. The point is you want to feel better. You want to get your mind off of it. And this actually, in many cases, brings you a step back.
I want to say something specific about smart pills, study meds, stimulants. I do some work in the ADHD area, and the number of college students here and elsewhere, even the number of high school students at academically pressured high schools using their friends or roommates' ADHD medications is really alarming. And you could say, well, what's the harm? Everybody's going to get a little smarter on these pills. Everybody drinks coffee. Well, these stimulants, are pretty effective if you have bona fide ADHD. B, will keep you up a little bit later if you don't have ADHD, but don't really affect your learning. There's clear evidence that that's the case. But C, if you don't have ADHD and you're taking these occasionally as study aids, the risk of getting addicted to these meds is very significant, and it's not a pretty picture. So we could talk about alcohol, marijuana, other illicit drugs as well. But in terms of the stimulants as smart pills, the evidence is now showing us they're not smart pills.
What about alcohol? What's the incidence of use to alleviate stress, and what downstream effects do you see?
Well, I know that we will see students, that it's sometimes hard to distinguish. Did they start their alcohol use as a coping mechanism for the anxiety or the depression, or did they, or the other way around? And sometimes it's very individual. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to make a blanket statement on that. But we definitely are seeing students who are saying, the only way I feel like I can go to sleep is to smoke. And so on and so forth.
And we know that there's genetic vulnerabilities that differ across people. Mm-hmm. Some people will handle a lot of stress pretty resiliently. Other people, often with family histories, will get into problems with alcohol and drugs or get into problems with major depression. So it's individual vulnerability, the stress of college, but it's how you cope with it that's really essential.
And each student has their own relationship. Each person has their own relationship with drugs, including alcohol. And I think we hit on the key point, which is to not use it as a coping mechanism, but to really determine for yourself in a non-coping way how to interact with drugs.
And I'll just mention that in another segment, we explore the issue of alcohol awareness and responsible use. Let me move on, given that we're running out of time, to the issue of proactive steps that students can take to maintain mental health and emotional well-being, as you're saying, Steve. Any thoughts on that?
So the first thought is physical well-being is an inextricable part of mental well-being. Mm-hmm. Keep up your exercise, keep up your meditation, keep what you do to keep yourself healthy physically. That will have spillover mentally. Number two, take the advice of this panel and think of well checkups and getting some help, not as a sign of weakness, but as a sign of strength.
Yeah, I would use anticipation. Anticipate the kinds of things that may be stressful for you, so you can start to plan out how you might combat them. I would use the word engagement. Don't be a passive recipient of your education here at Berkeley. Engage in your academics, and then you used the word resilience earlier. That's one that's huge. We know that students who are more resilient, they're better at problem solving. They have social connections. That they bounce back when something bad happens.
And yet, Aaron, resilience is often so thought as an internal. Right. Given quality. Oh my gosh, that person is so resilient.
I was born resilient.
Yes,
exactly.
And but you're shaking your head.
No, you can learn it, and you can build it, and you can stimulate it. Absolutely.
Great. So. And what, in terms of counseling and psychological services, or CPS, if I'm a student or I have a friend who would like to go there, where do we just show up? How much are appointments? What insurance? How do you handle all of that?
Sure, absolutely. Again, whether it be by phone, whether it be walking in person down to the Tang Center, the University Health Service, and coming right into our office, all students, regardless of health insurance, and sometimes students get confused about this, and they shouldn't. All students, regardless of health insurance, have access to counseling and psychological services. Awesome. One of the things that we've really tried to do is keep finances out of being a barrier. And so the first 5 sessions at Counseling and Psychological Services, including the initial assessment, are free. But all students have access to up to 8 sessions. And so that's really important. But the other piece that I think is equally important to just touch on is that we are a short-term counseling center. We are very much a problem-solving, focused counseling center. We want to assess what's going on for you, make some recommendations. If there are more ongoing issues that need to be attended to, or someone is wanting consistent treatment throughout a semester, then the reason that students are asked to have insurance is to cover these kinds of things. And I know that the students, at the least on our SHIP insurance, have absolutely wonderful access to mental health providers in the community.
What I'll add on is I've been the student that's called in for emergency counseling, walked in for emergency counseling. used my 5 free sessions, and I want to highlight again, 5 free counseling sessions, regardless of insurance, regardless of documentation status. I used all 8, what transferred to a local provider in the Berkeley area through the help of counseling and psychological services to find that person. And I've also been a part of group counseling at the Tang Center, which is an option
as well. Can I touch on, I was glad you said that, because each semester we offer anywhere from 15 to 20 groups.
Okay.
And some of our most successful groups, if we want to talk about this idea of getting ahead of this, right when you have the stress, are our stress management groups. They're anywhere from 6 to 8 week groups. They usually will start kind of within the first month of the academic semester, and they're a wonderful place to meet other students who are experiencing similar issues.
And there are identity-based
That's
groups
what I was
as well.
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. Okay. We have both what we call skills-based groups, where students are learning skills, addressing those negative self-thoughts, learning mindfulness and meditation, and we have what we call process groups, understanding self and other, just trying to understand how relationships are building. And we have groups for students who identify as LGBT, and a number of other groups. It's really a great offering.
And Madison, where do students go to find these groups?
Yeah, so you can walk into Counseling and Psychological Services, and they have a bunch of really beautifully colored flyers. For some of the groups, not all of them, you have to be seeing a counselor regularly. You can also find them online, I believe, at the Counseling and Psychological Services website.
And then just one more online, I have to push one more online thing, our Be Well campaign, which is really about proactively getting ahead of the curve. It's about wellness, it's about gratitude, it's about positive psychology, and you can get to that through our website as well.
And just briefly, really quickly, I know that I hear a lot of students say, I'm just so stressed and I've reached out to my professor and they just don't understand. What is your advice for a student? How do they approach that in the academic sphere?
So go to multiple places, graduate student instructors, peer-to-peer, informally or formally. Some professors are more equipped than others. Find your support network. I mean, I think the big issue is this time of life when most people go to college. It's the time of maximum strength physically and cognitively. It's the greatest time of your life, and it's the time of most risk for substance problems, emotional and behavioral problems. And taking this proactive approach will go a long way.
We've covered so much ground today, and I'd like to conclude by asking you to think about that one piece of information that you would like our viewers to take with them throughout the rest of their careers. Something brief, a quick nugget. Madison, let me start with you.
Yeah. Well, I think something that I wanted to say that hasn't been said is counseling isn't the only way to take care of your mental health. We've mentioned physical health, meditation, support groups, identity groups. If you're a part of a certain identity, reaching out to student and peer groups can be really helpful. Acupuncture. So there are lots of different kinds of ways to take care of your mental health. And when in doubt, take care of yourself. You're number one.
Yeah, I would say use the resources. UC Berkeley is a wonderful institution when people are proactive. UC Berkeley works a little less efficiently when we're reactive to things. We want students to be proactive.
If you don't work out physically, your muscles atrophy. If you don't proactively work emotionally and mentally, your well-being atrophies. This is a muscle, it's a skill, it's not something you're born with or not.
It becomes something that you train until it becomes a habit, a vertical theme throughout our series. Let me thank Stephen Hinshaw, Madison Gordon, Aaron Cohen. Thank you for being here, and thank you for watching.